Opening. There used to be an unwritten rule at Hyundai's overseas offices. Come 5 p.m., the laptops shut down. The local staff would clock out, and if headquarters in Seoul needed a video conference during Korean business hours, usually the middle of the night locally, it simply didn't happen. The Korean managers felt helpless against this local culture, tiptoeing around it to avoid conflict. But recently, the atmosphere has shifted dramatically. The comfortable excuses have evaporated. Suddenly, those late-night calls are mandatory, and the local culture shield is gone. Why? Because the person demanding that intensity isn't a traditional Korean executive anymore. It's Jose Muñoz, a Spanish-American CEO. He knows the global game inside out, and he isn't buying the old excuses. This tension on the ground signals a much larger, almost radical experiment taking place at the very top. I was looking at the latest boardroom restructuring for Hyundai, and the numbers are genuinely shocking for a company considered the national pride of Korean manufacturing. It's not just the CEO, the sacred R&D department. The engine room of the company is now being handed to a German engineer from Porsche. In fact, over 70% of Hyundai's top leadership is now foreign. Americans, Germans, Belgians. It looks less like a Korean Chaebol and more like a United Nations summit. It raises a fascinating high-stakes question. Is this the catfish effect needed to force survival in the U.S. market, or is stripping away the Koreanness of the leadership destined to repeat the cultural communication disasters we saw with LG years ago?
That opening really it perfectly frames what's happening.
Right.
We're calling this the de-Koreanization of the Chaebol. And for this deep dive, we're looking at this radical, almost unprecedented leadership shift at Hyundai Motor Group and a few others.
Right.
And this goes so far beyond just, a diversity initiative. This is a strategic dismantling of decades of corporate tradition, all in the name of, ruthless global competitiveness.
Okay, let's unpack that, because you hit on the core conflict tradition versus the raw need to survive globally. And we have to start with the sheer scale of this change. It's a direct assault on what used to be called pure bloodism. For anyone listening who might not be familiar, in this context, that's the corporate preference for hiring and promoting Koreans, often from a very specific set of elite universities, for all the key powerful roles.
And that wasn't just a quirk of culture, It was the engine of the Chaebol. These massive family-run conglomerates. They were built on this intense loyalty, a shared cultural shorthand that let them grow at lightning speed domestically.
But now Hyundai is just systematically breaking that mold. They're putting foreigners not just in, overseas marketing, but in the very heart of the company.
The intellectual and operational core. Exactly.
It's honestly shocking. They're handing over the keys to R&D and design. In Korea, those departments are practically sacred. They're a source of national pride.
And that 70% foreign leadership figure, 70% of presidents and directors, that's not a subtle shift. It's a declaration of war on the old system.
It really is.
It's a statistical declaration of war.
Okay.
And you can see Chairman Chung Wi-sun's mandate behind it all. He's saying, look, the future depends on ability on a global perspective, not on your heritage or where you went to school.
And the nationalities involved. American, German, Belgian.
Yeah.
It really underscores that they're casting the net as wide as possible because they feel the local talent pool just isn't enough anymore.
It's too narrow. It's too narrow to handle the insane complexity of manufacturing, tech, and, as we'll see, geopolitics today.
So let's put some faces to these new appointments. We have to start with the guy setting the pace, Jose Muñoz. He's more than just an executive. He's a culture changer.
He is. He's Spanish-American, and he has these dual titles. CEO and Global Chief Operating Officer. The fact that he's the first foreign CEO since the company was founded that's a massive symbolic move.
And his reputation precedes him. Profitability-driven management.
Yeah, that's the key phrase. This isn't about running the company politely. It's about maximizing returns. And he's known for just aggressively tearing down any organizational friction that gets in the way of that.
And then there's the appointment that I think raised the most eyebrows, certainly internally, Manfred Hehrer, the man taking over the sacred R&D headquarters.
Hehrer is the pure embodiment of this strategy. A German engineer, currently a vice president, but everyone expects him to be the next president of R&D and his career path. Yeah. It's just astonishing. It tells you exactly why Hyundai went after him so hard.
So where's he from?
He oversaw chassis development at Porsche and BMW. That's the absolute pinnacle of mechanical hardware engineering excellence.
Yeah.
But then, and this is the crucial part, he went to Apple.
Apple? Doing what?
He led their autonomous driving project.
Wow. So that's the perfect combination, isn't it? The best of old school automotive hardware precision, and you combine that with the cutting-edge, agile, software-first mindset of Silicon Valley.
Exactly. Hyundai's biggest challenge is integrating vehicle hardware with incredibly complex software and doing it fast. The kind of thing that traditional, siloed, hierarchical R&D labs are terrible at.
So they clearly decided that a homegrown executive, someone who came up through the hardware ranks, just couldn't bridge that gap.
They couldn't. They wouldn't have the external perspective or, frankly, the deep IT expertise. Hehrer is the catalyst they need for that technical fusion.
And it doesn't stop with them. You've got guys like Luke Donkerwalk, the chief creative officer, who's shaping the whole brand's aesthetic.
Brian Latouf, the global chief safety and quality officer. And then there's Sung Kim, the strategic planning officer. If Herrer's presidential appointment becomes official, you're looking at 5 out of 6 presidents being foreigners.
That's not just a facelift, that's an entirely new skeleton being built inside the cable.
It's a total reorganization.
Yeah.
And it all flows from Chairman Chung's calculation. The pace of change in EVs, in autonomous driving, in global politics is just accelerating so fast that relying on the old strengths of loyalty and stability has become a liability, not if it costs you speed and expertise.
Which brings us right to the strategic necessity of it all. This isn't just about making better cars. It's about pure survival in a very high-stakes, very hostile external environment. I mean, Hyundai is a global company. 83% of their sales last year were overseas. They have to look outside because that's where their customers are.
So that 83% figure is it's the non-negotiable proof. A company that sells almost 9 out of 10 cars internationally cannot afford to have a leadership team that only thinks domestically. It's impossible.
But it's more than just serving customers. It's about mitigating these huge, immediate political risks. The appointment of Muñoz. You mentioned it was explicitly framed as a response to the Trump risk.
Yes, internally, that's what they call it. It was about proactively preparing for a potential second term of U.S. President Donald Trump.
Let's flesh that out for a second. What does that risk actually look like for a car company like Hyundai? It's not just some vague political worry.
No, it's a direct threat to their entire business model. First, Trump has consistently talked about higher tariffs on imported goods. You could see Section 232 tariffs that would immediately jack up the price of any car Hyundai imports into the U.S. That makes them way less competitive.
And what about EVs? Hyundai has bet the farm on EVs in the U.S. market.
That's the even bigger threat. They've invested billions in plants in battery tech. Trump has been openly pessimistic about EVs and has directly threatened to cut or even eliminate the tax benefits and subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA.
If the IRA benefits disappear, Hyundai's entire U.S. strategy, which is all about getting people to buy EVs with those incentives, it's dead in the water. That's an existential threat.
It is, absolutely. So what do? You install a sophisticated political buffer. And Muñoz is seen as the perfect fit. He has deep business experience in the U.S. He's been successful there. He understands the political and corporate landscape inside and out.
He doesn't need a briefing on how Washington works.
No. He already gets the legislative process, the key lobbying channels, the language of American business. It allows Hyundai to be vigilant against these political shocks in real time.
It's like hiring a translator of power. You don't just need a negotiator. You need a diplomat, a lobbyist, someone who can see policy shifts coming from a mile away.
Which is precisely why they also appointed Sung Kim,
the former U.S. ambassador to Korea.
Exactly. His role as president is purely strategic, purely diplomatic. He oversees global external affairs, analyzes policy trends. His job is to make sure Hyundai can talk to foreign governments and regulators with the same fluency as, say, Ford or GM.
And this shift from slow, traditional diplomacy to immediate action is captured perfectly in that story we heard about the meeting at Seoul HQ, the one about the new U.S. EV tax regulations.
Yes. This incident, it just perfectly illustrates the kind of friction they were desperate to get rid of.
So what would have happened the old way? A new regulation drops in the U.S.
The old way. Seoul headquarters kicks off a slow diplomatic dance. They'd rely on the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Their own legal teams would spend days translating dense policy documents.
Yeah.
Then it goes up the chain for approval, back down the chain. You're talking weeks just to figure out what to do.
And they're seen as, what, a foreign company asking for a favor?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the new way. Muñoz and his team, they're not outsiders. They're local heavyweights. They don't have to wait for that slow process. They're already embedded in the American corporate world.
So they change the conversation.
Instantly.
Yeah.
It's no longer a foreign entity asking for a favor. It's a major U.S. employer protecting American jobs at their plants in Alabama and Georgia.
And the reported difference in the timeline is it's staggering.
It is. A decision-making process that would have taken, conservatively, 3 weeks of approvals and back and forth was reportedly compressed into 30 minutes.
30 minutes?
30 minutes of high-level decision-making. That kind of speed is a competitive weapon. It means you can react to political shocks almost instantly. They're no longer just visiting the U.S. market. With these executives in charge, they are the market.
That makes the case for the external pressure crystal clear. But the cost of that speed is internal chaos, isn't it? Which takes us right into the organizational and cultural shock therapy. When you force this kind of change, something inside the company has to break.
And that clash is most visible in the R&D center, because historically, that was the most closed off, the most defensive of its pureblooddism.
The technical heart of the company.
Right. It relied almost exclusively on homegrown researchers who'd spent their entire careers inside Hyundai. So Hehir's appointment as Chairman Jeong basically planting a flag and saying, this fortress is now open.
And this is where that cultural friction becomes almost painful, especially in that story about the silence in the R&D lab. It shows how the old culture was actively killing the very innovation they needed.
You have to picture the scene at their Namyang R&D center. The whole atmosphere is dictated by this rigid, Confucian-based hierarchy and seniority.
So the person with the highest rank speaks, and everyone else listens.
Exactly. Which means if a senior mechanical engineer, a guy who earned his stripes building the company's legacy cars, says something, a junior software developer, even if he has the most cutting-edge knowledge, you can't challenge him. It's not done.
So he just stays silent.
He stays silent. He hesitates. He self-censors. And the result is that the chemical combination of hardware and software that you need for a modern EV, it just can't happen. The culture of deference smothers it.
It's a system that's wired for obedience, not for disruption.
Right. And then Manfred Hehrer walks in. And during one of his first technical reviews on a critical battery management system, no less, he sees it happen. He sees a young software engineer hesitate and then back down when a high-ranking director makes a wrong assumption about the software.
The junior engineer knew the director was wrong, but
the cultural barrier was just too high. You don't correct a director.
And Hehrer saw that silence not as politeness, but as a potential fatal technical error.
He stopped meeting right there. And his message was the ultimate shock therapy. He reportedly said something like, in this lab, hierarchy does not compile code. Technical accuracy must override organizational rank.
Wow.
And he didn't just say it. He changed the structure. He insisted on flat technical review meetings where the person with the most knowledge leads the discussion, regardless of their title or their age. He wasn't just fixing a bug. He was trying to re-engineer the entire workforce to embrace debate and meritocracy.
That must be unbelievably stressful for the Korean managers caught in the middle, the ones who grew up with the old rules of respect.
It's total organizational stress, and you see the exact same thing happening globally with what Jose Muñoz did. Which brings us back to your opening story, the end of the 5 p.m. rule.
Right. That rule where local staff would just clock out and ignore Seoul HQ after 5 p.m., it was a symbol of headquarters impotence.
It was. The Korean managers sent overseas felt totally helpless. They were steeped in this culture of Jeong, this idea of deep connection and harmony, which meant they would rather avoid conflict with local staff than enforce corporate policy.
And the local staff knew it. They could just say, oh, it's our local culture and get away with what HQ saw as, lazy practices.
But Muñoz, as the outsider, he isn't bound by that. He doesn't have those internal pressures.
He has no domestic network, no deep personal ties to the Korean old guard.
Which is actually a massive advantage for him. He's accountable only to global standards and the bottom line. So he just dismantled the local culture shield. He put in standardized global KPIs and made those late night video conferences mandatory. The excuses just evaporated.
So the key difference is that a Korean manager would hesitate to be that harsh for fear of damaging Jeong, damaging the relationship. But an outsider like Muñoz, he doesn't care about the relationship in the same way. He cares about alignment.
He uses that lack of internal Jeong as a tool for transparent, strict management. It's outsourcing the bad cop role in a way. It allows the Chaebol to be ruthless in a way a domestic executive might find culturally impossible.
And this isn't just a Hyundai story, which is a crucial point. We're seeing this trend of breaking K-pure-bloodism elsewhere. Hanwha Group is another prime example, and they're applying it in really sensitive areas like defense and energy.
Hanwha is the proof that this is a systemic shift across Korea's biggest companies. They're going right for the organizational DNA. I mean, look at their aerospace and defense division. This is critical to national security.
And they appointed who?
An American. Michael Coulter is the CEO of Hanwha Aerospace Defense.
That is a staggering commitment to ability over nationality, especially in the defense sector.
And it continues. In their energy equipment business, Hanwha Power Systems, the CEO is Rafi Vart, another American. It signals that even in industries that have always been viewed through a nationalist lens, they're now prioritizing foreign expertise to compete globally.
But the most powerful data point, the one that really underscores Hanwha's commitment to this, it's in their shipbuilding division.
Yes. The appointment of Philippe Revy, who is French, as a director of their core ocean business division. But it's not just the appointment, it's the detail that's stunning. Revy's reported pay was significantly higher than the salary of the Korean CEO running the division.
They pay the foreign director more than the Korean CEO.
Over 200 million won more. That is an explicit, unambiguous signal to everyone inside the company. Ability and the talent we need to acquire outweighs any internal tradition or pay scale.
It just rings loud and clear. We will pay what it takes to get the global expertise we need.
It's the exact same strategic intent we see at Hyundai. Survival and global relevance demand these deep and probably painful internal concessions.
This all paints a picture of a necessary, if very disruptive, change. But now we have to turn to the cost. What are the long-term risks? What happens to the human element when you replace a culture of loyalty with ruthless efficiency?
That is the ultimate question of sustainability, isn't it? Because this shock therapy, however necessary it seems from a strategic point of view, creates this profound sense of displacement and loss among the long-term Korean employees, the very people who built these companies.
And the emotional fallout is, it's best captured by that anonymous post from the Blind app, the app where verified employees can speak freely. This wasn't just a complaint, it felt more like corporate mourning.
It did. The post was from a self-proclaimed conglomerate veteran, and it laid the core conflict bare, the replacement of corporate heritage with pure efficiency.
Yeah.
And to really get it, you have to understand the concept of Jeong a bit more deeply.
It's more than just connection, right?
Oh, much more. Jeong is the emotional glue of a Korean company. It's about trust, shared history, unspoken understanding. It created a sense of a corporate family. It softened the hard edges of capitalism.
And now that family is being run by executives who, by definition, don't understand or value Jeong.
Exactly. The veteran of the post was mourning the end of the old ways, the unspoken understandings, the loyalty, all being replaced by 247 global responsiveness and cold, hard KPIs. And the fear they expressed was so profound. They asked, if the R&D head is German and the CEO is American, what is left of the Korean identity that built this company?
The fear of feeling like a guest in one's own house, that line is just, it's devastating.
It is. And that's the tightrope Chairman Chung has to walk. How do you get the global competitiveness you need to survive without completely alienating the loyal, dedicated Korean workforce that is still the backbone of your company?
Yeah.
If you lose them, the whole project can fail.
And this internal resistance, it's not just an emotional thing. There are actually academic counterpoints that suggest this whole strategy might be flawed.
Right. When you bring in outsiders this aggressively, especially into a core function like R&D, you run headlong into this academic tension around CEO insiderness.
What does the research say about insiders versus outsiders, especially in high-tech fields?
Well, a number of studies, particularly ones that use U.S. patent data as a measure of innovation, they often suggest that insider CEOs, the ones who rise through the ranks and have that deep institutional memory, actually show higher innovation performance than outsider CEOs.
Wait, so Hyundai is gambling that an outsider like Hehrer will innovate faster, but the academic data suggests the insider model might actually be better for generating high-tech patents. That's a huge strategic tension.
It is. And that positive correlation between being an insider and innovating is especially strong in high-tech industries, because so much of that innovation relies on tacit knowledge, the stuff you only know because you've been there for 20 years. You know who to call, how the real process works.
So the very thing Hyundai is doing, bringing in these ruthless outsiders, is fundamentally at odds with a model that says long-term loyalty drives innovation. They're trading deep institutional knowledge for speed.
It's a massive trade-off, and we don't even have to look that far to find a real-world example of this exact trade-off going horribly wrong. There's the LG Electronics cautionary tale from the late 2000s.
Right. They tried a similar kind of radical de-Koreanization, and it was a spectacular failure.
The LG case is the critical warning for Hyundai. In the late 2000s, LG went even further. They had 6 out of 8 C-level executive positions filled by foreigners. It was a bold attempt to go global fast.
And what was the outcome? What went wrong?
2 big things. The first was a strategic failure. They completely missed the boat on the shift to smartphones. But the root cause of that failure was often tied to the second problem: severe, crippling internal communication breakdowns.
The foreign execs were just alienated from the rest of the company.
Completely. And it wasn't just a language barrier, it was cultural. The Korean workforce communicates with a lot of nonverbal cues, deference, indirect phrasing. The Western execs, who are used to direct, blunt, merit-based communication, they just misinterpreted everything. They couldn't motivate the mid-level managers because they didn't understand the social dynamics.
So the very lack of internal connection that makes Muñoz so effective at enforcing rules made the LG execs totally ineffective at inspiring the workforce in Seoul. They didn't know how to build loyalty.
Exactly. The LG failure is the perfect lesson. You can't just import talent. You have to integrate it. If the cultural stress fractures the organization before you see the benefits, the whole strategy just collapses.
So given those risks, interesting to see how the other big cables are handling this. Hyundai and Hanwha are performing, open heart surgery. But Samsung and the current LG seem to be taking a much more measured approach.
They're learning from history. Samsung and today's LG are taking what you might call an incremental approach, not a revolutionary one. They're still appointing foreigners, but it's much more targeted.
To what kinds of roles?
Specialized, future-facing roles. Things like AI research, high-end design, global marketing, external affairs. But they are keeping tight internal Korean control over the core corporate strategy and governance.
A good example is Samsung's chief design officer.
Yes, a perfect example. They hired the Italian designer Mauro Porcini as the chief design officer for their mobile and home appliance division. His job is to bring a global design sensibility to their products. But he's not managing the entire R&D budget or setting the company's 5-year plan.
It's like they're applying the catfish effect very selectively. They'll drop a disruptive catfish into the design tank to shake things up, but they're not dropping it into the main reservoir where it might eat all the other fish.
It's a much more calculated risk management strategy. Hyundai and Hanwha have decided the external threat is so high, they have to tolerate the internal shock. Samsung and LG are betting they can get the evolution they need with these precision strikes of foreign talent without causing all the internal friction.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we come back to this great experiment at Hyundai and Hanwha. The strategic rewards seem crystal clear. You get market agility, you get political protection from guys like Muñoz and Sung Kim, and you get that necessary change from the catfish effect.
And that effect is critical to forcing these old hierarchical structures to adapt to a flat, globalized world. The goal is truly transformative. They want to stop being seen as a Korean company that sells cars overseas and become a true global enterprise that just happens to be headquartered in Korea.
Yeah. But the ultimate question remains. Is the price of stripping away that traditional Koreanness, the cultural stress, the loss of Jeong, the internal resistance from that veteran on the Blind app, is that price ultimately going to be too high? The very survival of the modern Chaebols seems to hinge on this. Can they find a way to honor the legacy built on loyalty while allowing these outsiders to tear down the very traditions that define them? This tension between identity and necessity is really the defining story of this new global business era for South Korea.